Hi everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. And today we saw so much denial from Chris Bishop that it wasn't funny. Chris Bishop appeared on Q&A with Jack Tame this morning at the National Party Losers Conference in Christchurch, and it was dark and it was dank and it was kind of shady there. And Chris Bishop spent about 20 minutes just denying everything. I mean, he was just perfect, and so was the government. And so no one could believe anything that the former tobacco salesman was saying. I mean, the guy, we hate to sort of be into ad hominem attacks on a person's character, but when we think about Chris Bishop, he's got a track record where he used to work in a company that peddled products that actually literally killed the customer. So when it comes to our well-being and telling the truth, we can think about all those tobacco salespeople who used to kind of say, well, there's a range of reasons why people get lung cancer, and, there's no hard evidence that says that smoking is necessarily bad for you. And this is the kind of thing that these guys that then go on and into politics have been actually trained in, and it's their one skill is to kind of run down the evidence and suggest that there's some kind of blurry, fuzzy space here that, you shouldn't believe in it, and you should keep smoking those cigarettes, especially around your children, and maybe the children themselves wouldn't even come to any harm, and they're not prepared to back down. So that's the kind of quality. We also had Chris Bishop, just in the past, getting in trouble with some parents over things that he was doing on a Snapchat application to some young people. And I hate to bring that kind of thing up, but, when it comes to the integrity and trusting the word of somebody that's going to appear on Q&A and represent the situation, we got to look, as Maya Angelou used to say, if someone shows you who they really are, believe them. So Chris Bishop, he was basically saying, essentially, he did not accept that any jobs had been lost at all due to government policy around housing or infrastructure. And of course, this can't be true because we know that there's something of the nature of about 18,000 jobs in that territory, according to all of the evidence. But according to Chris Bishop, it's just all Labor's fault, and it's because they inherited a mess when they came into government. But what you and I know is that when it came to Kāinga Ora, there was a budgeted amount that was all the way through to around about June 2025 to build more houses. But along came Sir Bill, and Sir Bill texted Chris Bishop, are there any jobs going, around KO? And then they had a chat on text that suggested that there was actually work for Sir Bill to do. And he wrote a report that we've talked about before that was full of errors, and it really wasn't based on fact. And the goal was to say that Kāinga Ora was financially unsustainable, and you needed to be able to, like a tobacco salesman, a former tobacco salesman or promoter, say that this was actually just the case, to sell that. And it's like selling lung cancer to children. There are a range of causes of lung cancer, so it can't just be cigarettes. And people that come from that industry are trained to actually be able to sell you some doubt in the fuzzy spaces when it comes to evidence. But here, the National Party said, well, look, Kāinga Ora is obviously unsustainable and they can't keep building all these houses. And it came up that Bishop started arguing that some of the houses that were being built around the country were just not economic because they weren't in places that Chris Bishop thought were economic to build houses. But we've got this big shortage of supply of houses in New Zealand, haven't we? And of course now that's all dried up. We've also got Chris Bishop belonging to the ACT Party, but before he got into politics, he was the ACT Party youth president, and his father is a founder of the Taxpayers Union, and there are Atlas Network taxpayers unions all around the world, and they're closely associated with the kind of politics that the ACT Party stand for. So here's Chris Bishop with all of that background and all of that kind of thinking about small government, privatisation, austerity, coming into politics and fronting on Q&A today about how not one job has been lost in infrastructure because of government policy. when actually all of those jobs were lost at Kaingaora, all of those projects and housing supply were stalled. And because he's kind of a privatiser, he had tried to level the playing field and bring in these community housing providers who were semi-private or private operators. And there's nothing too wrong with that, because, you know, we want those houses to be built. But the overall supply had gone from this big down to that big under Chris Bishop, and this contraction and a whole bunch of excuses about fiscal cliffs that had surprised them. But as you know, all of this information was there in the May 2023 budget, and National were just telling us a big cool story, bro, about how they were shocked and surprised and inherited a mess. But so essentially what happened was all this denial happened this morning on Q&A, and Chris Bishop wouldn't accept that any jobs at all had been lost because of government cancellation of infrastructure projects. Now, some of those jobs he did accept were around things like the light rail to the airport, which got kind of delayed because there was a pandemic in the middle of the last 6 years. That did slow down because a lot of things came to a bit of a halt. There were waiting lists because people stayed at home and weren't working on infrastructure projects. But as we know, those jobs didn't really count to Chris Bishop, and he tried to use it in a negative way this morning to say, well, consultants, big fat consultants, they might have lost their jobs, but nobody that actually puts the shovel in the ground. Well, I actually personally know people that came to the end of projects and it's all dried up, and they've been put out of work and they're unemployed, and now they have to go somewhere else, maybe Australia, to get a job, or they need to move out of the industry and do something new. So Chris Bishop then went on to talk about the topic of homelessness, and once again denial. We saw Chris Bishop deny that there was anything at all wrong with his policy to make it very hard for people to actually get access to an emergency house anymore. And basically what he was saying is that the latest report that came out of HUD, the Insights report, it didn't actually say that it was government's fault, because they couldn't really attribute the root cause to any one factor. And he wouldn't even accept that this was a contributing factor. He basically just blew it off and says he didn't accept it. It's a bit like saying, well, I do not accept that the earth is round. I think it's flat. I do not accept that smoking causes lung cancer. I just don't accept it. I disagree. And in this case, he disagreed with the people at the Auckland City Mission who had first-hand experience. Bishop tried to make out that, well, he'd been involved for a couple of weeks now, but as you saw, Chris Bishop actually got hold of that report before it was released to the public, and he was involved in changes that were made to the data in that very report. So the public are seeing a report that's first been doctored by Chris Bishop, and we don't know how many changes he made to numbers, what he did, what emphasis he gave, what he insisted on. There was no way that he could accept even a modicum of responsibility for the way in which homelessness exploded in the months after the National Party in August 2024 implemented a much tighter, make it harder for everyone to get access to emergency housing policy, and by September, homelessness was starting to take off. By January, it had doubled, and by May, it had doubled again. And now the headlines in the New Zealand Herald today say, well, Chris Bishop reluctantly accepts that he may have to make a small tweak, but he's very reluctant to change anything when all of the other factors were constant, that he, like the economic trends that were going on. And basically he's saying, well, you know, I do not accept what the City Mission is saying, what the people who are dealing with homeless, what the homeless themselves are saying. I do not accept any of that. And I believe that we are perfect. We are the government that's perfect, but we, the good guys, even so, will actually possibly make a small tweak. But we don't want people going back to hotels, motels, that kind of thing. We'd rather they stayed pregnant or whatever on the street. Maybe we'd rather they stay in the cold. It's very cold at night, so we'd rather that, because motels, they're dark and dank, and we don't want that. Chris Bishop also was talked about the topic of Christopher Luxon. And Christopher Luxon's leadership, as you know, is now looking very, very insecure. He hasn't done well. Everyone knows that he may not actually make it to the next election. Some people on the left want him to stay because he's the best weapon that the Greens and Labour and Te Pāti Māori have. So they're hoping that National won't change the leader. But they also note that there are no other candidates because they're all pretty rotten. So we've got a situation where, just like this wreck behind me, the National Party leadership is just not firing. And Jack Tame asked the question of Chris Bishop, why is it that in all of those polls, something like about 30 of the last polls, Christopher Luxon's never really averaged much more than 25, which is a shocker. I mean, at her lowest point, Dame Jacinda Ardern, she scored something like 30-something%. You know, she exited politics in a higher popularity than Christopher Luxon at his peak. So we're really just looking now at a very, very unpopular Prime Minister who's failed, who's not really present, who isn't really a person. Even his party president says his humanity is not visible because he's full of spin and he's just talking spin. We saw all of those things that have happened recently, and Chris Bishop, he's basically saying, Christopher Luxon's doing an excellent job. So again, it's just not plausible to say that Christopher Luxon's doing an excellent job when he's patently not. Again, a third example of denial here from Chris Bishop, who just can't be trusted if he's going to lie like that on Q&A. Now, there was also questions there about the overall performance of National in the polls. They haven't actually, in the last year, got more than one poll to say that they were on 35% or more. And they were on about 37, 38% at the election. Now they're polling in the most recent poll around 32%, and they're heading down. The FBI office wouldn't have helped. The Project 10, when it came to stealing pay equity off all the low-income workers, that wouldn't have helped. And neither would have the Regulatory Standards Bill, neither would have all the kind of things that we're seeing around dressing up and going around saying you've got these infrastructure projects, or really just playing around with Fonterra to try and fool the public that you're going to lower the price or do something in supermarkets when you're not. Plus banking and making things worse for people in retail. Inflation's coming up like this while Nicola Willis and all of these National Party people are blaming Liberation Day from Trump. So we're seeing denial, we're seeing dishonesty, we're seeing a government you cannot trust, we're seeing a government that's prepared to lie to our faces when we know it's not true about the number of jobs that they have caused to be lost in the construction industry because of their government policies. But they're not prepared to accept any blame or any responsibility, and they're arrogantly going about saying that the city mission isn't even being straight with you when the city mission is. And it's just trying to work with the government now and be diplomatic and come to some kind of arrangement where something can be done for the homeless, because that's all the city mission really cares about, is helping people, unlike the government who cares about being re-elected and power. So that's basically all I wanted to say to you today. We're here down at what's called Blackpool on Waiheke Island, and this wreck here is pretty fabulous. But on this beach here, we've actually got some very rare migratory birds, the godwits that come and go, flying all around to China and Alaska and then all the way back here. And there's something like a population of about 50 of them. And right now there's a couple of people taking a boat out over next to me here, and the tide's coming in and they're going out fishing on a beautiful Sunday. I hope you have a beautiful Sunday too, and I'll talk to you all again soon on G News.
Welcome to G News, the good news.